The rifle case hit the table with a dull thud, and Corporal Davis looked up from his coffee, eyes narrowing at the worn leather exterior. "Bet you 20 she doesn't even qualify," he muttered to the Marine beside him, loud enough that Staff Sergeant Keller heard it 3 tables away. The other Marine, Thompson, snorted into his drink. 20? Make it 50. That thing looks like it survived Iwo Jima. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes heard every word as she unzipped the case, her fingers moving with practiced certainty over the latches. The morning sun cut through the range facility's windows, illuminating dust motes and the skeptical faces of 17 Marines who had paused their pre-qualification routines to watch her arrival. She had known this moment would come. It always did. The rifle emerged from its case, and the murmuring grew louder. The metal showed its age, the bluing worn away in patches where her hands had gripped it through countless hours of training. The stock bore scratches and dings that told stories of deployments and field exercises. To untrained eyes, it looked like something pulled from a surplus bin, maybe even rusted in places where the finish had worn completely through to bare steel. Captain Morrison approached her station, his boots clicking against the concrete floor with deliberate authority. His clipboard was already in hand, the gesture of a man preparing to document a problem. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet of the range house. "That weapon meets current armory standards?" She looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir. Fully functional and within specifications. I can provide maintenance records if needed." He glanced at the rifle again, his jaw tightening slightly. The washout rate for this qualification is 68%, even among experienced marksmen. His paws hung in the air, like a question that was not quite a question. "You understand we maintain certain equipment standards here for a reason. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have seen this kind of judgment in your own community, where assumptions were made before capability was proven." Reyes kept her expression neutral, though her pulse had quickened slightly. "I understand, sir. The rifle has been with me for 8 years. I know its characteristics better than any weapon I could draw from your armory." Morrison's eyebrows lifted fractionally. 8 years. He wrote something on his clipboard, the pen scratching loudly in the silence. "Well, we will see about that." He turned to address the room, his voice rising to command volume. "All shooters, qualification begins in 30 minutes. Check your assigned lanes and prepare your equipment." As he walked away, Davis leaned toward Thompson again, not bothering to lower his voice this time. 30 minutes until we watch her washout. I've seen brand new rifles jam on this course. That antique is going to fall apart in her hands." Thompson nodded, already pulling out his wallet. "I'm in for 50. She won't make it past the 200-yard line. Probably going to cite equipment failure and request a different rifle within the first hour." Reyes continued her preparation, running her hands along the rifle's length with the familiarity of old friendship. She checked the action, smooth as silk despite its appearance. The trigger broke cleanly at exactly 3.5 pounds, precisely where she had adjusted it years ago. The scope, though its finish was scratched and dulled, held 0 perfectly. She had confirmed it just yesterday at her home range, the same way she confirmed it before every qualification, every deployment, every moment that mattered. Gunnery Sergeant Phillips, the range master, stopped at her station. His face was weathered from decades of sun and wind, his eyes sharp with professional assessment. "Ma'am," he said quietly, respectfully, but with an edge of concern that made it clear he was trying to help. "If you need to draw a different rifle from the armory, I can arrange that. No questions asked. No judgment. We have excellent weapons available." She appreciated that he had lowered his voice, sparing her the public questioning. "Thank you, Gunny. I appreciate the offer, but I will be using this rifle." His eyes moved from her face to the weapon and back again. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. "Your call, Staff Sergeant." He walked away, shaking his head slightly, and she saw him exchange a meaningful look with Captain Morrison across the room. Around her, 17 Marines checked their equipment with the confidence of men who knew their capabilities and their weapons. Most carried M110 semi-automatic sniper systems, sleek and modern, with pristine black finishes. A few had M40A6S, bolt-action rifles that gleamed with careful maintenance. Every weapon looked like it had rolled off the factory floor that morning. Lane assignments were called out, and Reyes gathered her gear. She had been assigned Lane 4, which put her directly in the sight line of the observation tower where Morrison and Phillips would be scoring. Not an accident, she thought. They wanted a clear view of her inevitable failure. As she walked to her lane, carrying the rifle case and her shooting bag, she passed a cluster of Marines preparing their positions. One of them, a muscular corporal with a high-and-tight haircut, watched her approach. "Hey," he called out. "Did you get that rifle at a garage sale?" His companions laughed, the sound sharp and masculine in the morning air. Another one chimed in. "My grandfather has a hunting rifle that looks better than that. At least his doesn't have rust on it." Reyes kept walking, her face impassive, but her mind cataloged every voice, every face. She would remember them all when this was over. The course stretched out before her, target stations positioned at 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 yards, and 300 yards. Each station would require different shooting positions and techniques. Each station was designed to eliminate the unworthy. She reached lane 4 and began setting up her position. The shooting mat rolled out smoothly. Her spotting scope, as worn-looking as the rifle, was nonetheless perfectly calibrated. She arranged her ammunition, each round hand-loaded to exact specifications, each one a product of hundreds of hours learning the precise powder charges and bullet weights that her rifle preferred. Morrison's voice crackled over the range loudspeakers. "All shooters, take your positions for 50-yard standing. You will have 3 minutes to engage 5 targets. Scoring requires 4-inch grouping at center mass. This is a pass-fail station. Failure at any station means immediate disqualification." Reyes stood, bringing the rifle to her shoulder. The weight settled into her body like coming home. The rifle settled against her shoulder with familiar weight, the stock meeting her cheek at the exact angle she had carved into muscle memory over thousands of repetitions. Through the scope, the first target materialized with crystal clarity, a black silhouette at 50 yards that seemed close enough to touch. Around her, the other Marines were adjusting their positions, the rustle of gear and clothing filling the morning air with nervous energy. Morrison's voice cut through the preparation. "Shooters ready." The command echoed across the range, flat and authoritative. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Fire at will." The range erupted with gunfire, a rolling thunder of reports that overlapped and merged into continuous sound. Reyes squeezed her trigger, feeling the familiar break, the rifle pulsing against her shoulder with each shot. She worked through her 5 targets with mechanical precision, each trigger press following the same rhythm she had practiced until it became unconscious. 5 seconds. 5 shots. 5 targets engaged. She lowered the rifle and stepped back from the line, her station now cold while others continued firing. Davis, 2 lanes over, glanced in her direction with a smirk. "Quick trigger finger does not mean accurate trigger finger," he said to Thompson, who was still engaging his targets. "Watch." She probably scattered those rounds all over the backstop. The ceasefire command rang out, and range officers moved forward to score targets. Phillips approached lane 4 with his spotting scope, his weathered face arranged in professional neutrality. He raised the scope to his eye, examining her target for what felt like a very long moment. Then he keyed his radio. "Lane 4, 5 rounds, all center mass, 4-inch group. Perfect score." The announcement carried across the range in Morrison's voice, amplified and clear. "Lane 4, pass. Next station, 100-yard prone." Davis's smirk vanished. Thompson turned to stare at her lane, his mouth slightly open. Around the range, Marines who had been focused on their own performances now glanced toward lane 4 with new interest. Someone muttered, "Lucky shots," but the words lacked conviction. Reyes moved to the prone position, settling onto her shooting mat as the other Marines adjusted their gear for the distance change. At 100 yards, the targets were half the size, black circles against white backing that demanded greater precision. The morning sun had risen higher now, creating heat shimmer that would test elevation judgment and make the targets dance slightly in optical sights. She could hear conversations around her as Marines prepared their positions. "That rifle looks like it should be in a museum," someone said from Lane 6. "How is she even hitting anything with that sight picture? The scope has to be fogged up inside." Another voice responded, "Doesn't matter. 100-yard prone separates the pretenders. This station has a 43% failure rate. That antique is about to show its age." Morrison's voice returned to the speakers. 100-yard prone. 7 targets. 10 rounds. Minimum 6 hits, center mass required to pass. Wind is currently 3 miles per hour left to right. Shooters ready. Reyes chambered around, the bolts sliding home with the solid mechanical certainty of well-maintained steel. Through her scope, she watched the flags along the range, reading the wind with eyes that had learned to see air movement in grass bending and dust drifting. The wind was not quite 3 miles per hour. It was closer to 4, with slight gusting that would push bullets right if not compensated. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Fire when ready." She worked through her strings steadily, adjusting for each target's position and the wind's subtle shifts. The rifle spoke with sharp authority, each report clean and consistent. Other shooters were still engaging when she cleared her weapon and stepped back from the line. Davis was struggling with his 5th target, his shots straying right as the wind picked up slightly. Thompson fired his 10th round and immediately shook his head in frustration. The scoring seemed to take longer this time. Phillips moved from lane to lane with his spotting scope, calling out results to Morrison in the tower. Lane 1, 7 hits. Pass. Lane 2, 5 hits. Fail. Move to remedial training. Lane 3, 8 hits. Pass. He reached lane 4 and raised his scope. The silence stretched out as he examined her target. Then his radio crackled. Lane 4, 10 rounds fired. 10 hits. All center mass. Group size 3.2 inches. Morrison's pause before speaking was noticeable. Lane 4 pass. Highest score of the morning. Next station, 200-yard sitting. The murmuring around the range grew louder now. Marines were no longer hiding their stares. Davis had passed his station, but was looking at her with narrowed eyes, his earlier confidence replaced by something harder to read. Thompson had failed and was packing his gear with angry movements, his jaw clenched tight. Captain Morrison descended from the observation tower, his boots ringing on the metal stairs. He walked directly to lane 4, clipboard in hand, his face arranged in professional assessment that did not quite hide his surprise. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," he said, "your weapon. I need to inspect it." She handed him the rifle without hesitation, action open, magazine removed. He turned it over in his hands, examining the worn finish and the scratches on the stock. He checked the scope mounting, tested the action, looked down the barrel. His fingers traced the areas where the bluing had worn away, revealing bare metal underneath. "This has seen considerable use," he said, more statement than question. "Yes, sir. 8 years of regular training and 2 deployments. It has fired approximately 40,000 rounds under my ownership." He looked at her then, his eyes sharp and evaluating. 40,000 rounds through this barrel? You have not replaced it?" "No, sir. The barrel was hand-lapped by a master gunsmith. It still shoots half-minutio fangle groups when I do my part." Morrison handed the rifle back to her, his expression unreadable. "Carry on, Staff Sergeant. 200 yards sitting position. 10 minutes to prepare." As he walked back toward the tower, she heard him key his radio and speak quietly to Phillips. "Keep close attention on lane 4. I want to understand what we are seeing here." The other Marines were spreading out to their 200-yard positions now, and the conversations had shifted in tone. "That weapon should not be shooting like that," someone said from lane 7. "I have a brand new M110, and I just failed 100-yard prone. She is hitting perfect scores with something that looks like battlefield salvage." Gunnery Sergeant Phillips appeared at her shoulder as she settled into her sitting position. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "off the record, what is the story with that rifle?" She looked up at him, seeing genuine curiosity rather than skepticism now. I built it, Gunny. Started with a factory rifle 8 years ago and replaced or modified every component that mattered. The trigger, the barrel bedding, the stock fitting, the scope mounting. Every piece was chosen and adjusted specifically for how I shoot. He studied the rifle with new interest. And you maintain it yourself? Every cleaning, every adjustment. I know this weapon better than I know anything else in my life. Phillips nodded slowly, something like respect beginning to show in his weathered face. Well, let us see how it handles 200 yards. This station has a 51% failure rate. The sitting position is unstable, and at this distance, every minor error gets magnified. He walked away, and Reyes arranged herself into the sitting position, her body forming the stable platform she had trained into automatic response. Around her, Marines were struggling with their own positions, trying to find the balance between stability and comfort that made accurate shooting possible. The 200-yard line stretched before her like a judgment rendered in distance and wind. Reyes settled deeper into her sitting position, legs crossed and elbows braced against knees in the classic configuration that had been tested and refined over generations of marksmen. The rifle found its natural point of aim, the crosshairs settling on the first target with minimal input from her hands. This was the position where body mechanics mattered more than equipment, where any tension or misalignment would translate directly into missed shots. Morrison's voice carried across the range with the weight of experience that had seen hundreds of Marines fail at this exact distance. 200-yard sitting position. 8 targets. 12 rounds. Minimum 7 hits center mass required to pass. Current wind is variable, 4 to 6 miles per hour, left to right with occasional gusts. This station eliminates more shooters than any other distance. Shooters ready. From lane 6, she heard Corporal Martinez speaking to his shooting partner. Money says this is where the rust bucket finally quits. 200 yards sitting is brutal. That scope probably can't even focus clearly at this range. His partner, a lance corporal named Chun, kept his voice low, but not low enough. I'm more interested in how she got 2 perfect scores. Nobody shoots perfect scores with equipment that looks like that. Something doesn't add up. Martinez snorted. Luck adds up. Eventually it runs out. Watch her group open up to 10 inches. That's what happens when you're shooting worn-out equipment past its service life. Reyes breathed slowly, letting the conversations fade into background noise. Through her scope, the wind flags told their story in fabric and movement. The wind was not steady at 4 to 6 miles per hour. It was gusting between 3 and 7, with a pattern that repeated approximately every 40 seconds. She had watched it through 3 cycles now, while the other shooters settled into position. The timing mattered. The gusts mattered. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Fire when ready. She waited. Other rifles began their reports, a scattered percussion that spoke of different timing and different approaches. She watched the flags through her peripheral vision, felt the wind touch her face, counted seconds in her mind. 28, 29, 30. The gust passed, and the flags settled into their lighter dance. Now, the rifle pulsed against her shoulder in controlled rhythm. She worked through her 8 targets during the lull between gusts, each shot placed with a wind compensation she had learned to calculate without conscious thought. The crosshairs settled. The trigger broke. The rifle recoiled. The process repeated with the mechanical precision of long practice. When the next gust began to build, she was already clear and safe, her weapon empty and her targets engaged. Davis, in lane 2, was still shooting. She could hear his frustration in the increased pace of his shots, the rhythm becoming hurried rather than controlled. Someone in lane 8 fired their 12th round and immediately cursed under their breath, the word carrying clearly across the range in the relative quiet between shots. Phillips moved forward with his spotting scope as the ceasefire was called. He scored the lanes methodically, his radio calls clipped and professional. Lane 1, 6 hits. Fail. Lane 2, 7 hits. Pass. Minimum qualifying score. Lane 3, 8 hits. Pass. He reached lane 4 and raised his scope. The pause was longer this time, long enough that other Marines stopped their equipment management to watch. His radio crackled. Lane 4, 12 rounds fired, 12 hits, all center mass, group size 2.8 inches. The silence that followed was different from before. It had weight now, substance. This was no longer luck or coincidence. This was a pattern emerging from what should have been impossible. Morrison's voice, when it came over the speakers, held a new quality, something between professional assessment and genuine curiosity. Lane 4 pass. Perfect score. 3 stations, 3 perfect scores. He paused, and Reyes could almost hear him consulting with Phillips before continuing. All shooters, 30-minute break before final station. 300-yard prone. Use this time to hydrate and prepare equipment. The range exploded into conversation the moment Morrison finished speaking. Marines clustered in small groups, their voices rising with speculation and disbelief. Reyes began cleaning her rifle, running patches through the barrel with the same methodical care she brought to shooting it. The fouling came out clean, consistent, showing the even burn that good ammunition and proper barrel maintenance produced. Captain Morrison approached again, this time accompanied by Gunnery Sergeant Phillips. Both men wore expressions of professional interest that bordered on something stronger. Staff Sergeant Reyes, Morrison said, "A word, please." She stood, coming to attention automatically. "Sir." At ease. Morrison glanced at Phillips, then back to her. "In 22 years of running qualification courses, I have seen exactly 4 shooters achieve perfect scores through all 4 stations. 3 of them were using match-grade rifles with custom builds and hand-loaded ammunition. The 4th was a Marine who went on to win the National Trophy individual rifle match at Camp Harry." She said nothing, waiting for the question she knew was coming. "Your rifle," Morrison continued, "looks like it belongs in a surplus bin. Your scope looks like it survived a deployment in a dust storm. Yet you're shooting scores that match or exceed what I would expect from the finest equipment available." He gestured at the weapon in her hands. "Explain this to me," Phillips added quietly, because right now, every Marine on this range is questioning whether their expensive, pristine rifles are actually disadvantages. Reyes looked down at her rifle, at the worn finish and the scratches that mapped years of use. "Sir, the rifle looks old because it is old. But old and worn out are not the same thing. Every component in this weapon has been selected, fitted, and maintained to exact specifications. The barrel is hand-lapped and shoots half-minute groups. The trigger breaks at precisely 3.5 pounds with no creep or over-travel. The stock is bedded and fitted to my exact dimensions. The scope holds 0 through temperature changes and recoil because I mount it correctly and check it constantly." Morrison listened, his head tilted slightly. "And the maintenance?" "I clean it after every use, sir. I check the scope mounting before every qualification. I load my own ammunition to exact specifications because factory ammunition varies too much lot to lot. This rifle looks bad, but it shoots better than most custom builds because I know it completely. Every characteristic, every preference, every quirk." Phillips nodded slowly. "How many rounds do you fire annually, maintaining that level of familiarity?" "Between training and practice, approximately 5,000 rounds, Gunny. Every weekend in my home range, unless I am deployed. I shoot the exact same rifle, the exact same ammunition, the exact same way, every single time." Morrison and Phillips exchanged glances. The captain made a note on his clipboard, then looked back at her with something new in his expression. "Staff Sergeant, after you complete the final station, I would like you to remain for a conversation, regardless of your score on 300-yard prone." "Yes, sir." They walked away, and Reyes returned to her equipment preparation. Around her, the conversations had shifted again. She could hear Marines discussing her rifle with new tones, less mockery, and more confusion. Davis was arguing with Thompson near the water station, their voices carrying across the range in the break period quiet. "I'm telling you, something is wrong with this picture," Davis insisted. "Nobody shoots like that with a rifle that looks like garbage. Nobody." Thompson shrugged, his earlier confidence completely gone. Maybe the rifle doesn't matter as much as we think it does. Maybe we've been focusing on the wrong things. Davis shook his head emphatically. No, equipment matters. It has to matter. Otherwise, what's the point of all these expensive upgrades we keep buying? Chun joined their conversation, his voice thoughtful. Or maybe equipment matters less than knowing your equipment. She said she's fired 5,000 rounds a year through that same rifle. How many rounds do you fire annually through yours? Davis didn't answer, but his face said enough. Most Marines qualified once or twice a year and called it sufficient. The 300-yard line felt different from the others. The targets were smaller, black circles that seemed to shrink with distance, and the wind had picked up as the morning progressed into late afternoon. Heat shimmer rose from the ground in visible waves, making the targets dance and distort through optical sights. This was the station where physics and environmental conditions became as important as shooting skill, where even experienced marksmen struggled to maintain accuracy. Reyes settled onto her shooting mat, arranging her body into the prone position with the efficiency of countless repetitions. The rifle came to her shoulder and found its natural point of aim, the crosshairs settling on the distant target with only minimal adjustment needed. Around her, the other Marines were taking longer to prepare, fidgeting with their positions, adjusting their scopes, checking and rechecking their databooks for elevation and windage corrections. Martinez was 3 lanes over, speaking to Chun with barely controlled frustration. 300-yard prone has a 62% failure rate. 62%. Most of those failures are shooting modern match rifles with perfect maintenance records. She can't keep the streak going. It's mathematically improbable. Chin was studying his own data book, flipping pages and comparing notes. I've been watching her wind calls. She waits for the lulls. She's reading the flags better than anyone else on this line. Martinez glanced toward lane 4, his expression caught between skepticism and unwilling respect. So what? Wind reading doesn't explain 3 perfect scores with a rifle that looks like it should be decommissioned. There has to be something else going on. From lane 7, another voice joined the speculation. Maybe the scope has some kind of advanced ballistic computer hidden inside. You know, something that looks old school on the outside but has modern tech integrated. Davis, who had barely qualified at 200 yards, shook his head firmly. No way. Phillips inspected that rifle. Morrison inspected it. If there was anything non-regulation, they would have caught it. The conversation died as Morrison's voice cut across the range from the observation tower. Final station. 300-yard prone. 10 targets. 15 rounds. Minimum 8 hits center mass required to pass. Wind is currently 6 to 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12, left to right. Temperature is 87 degrees. This station determines who qualifies as expert marksman. Shooters ready. Reyes felt the wind against her face, stronger now than it had been all morning. The flags were snapping with authority, showing the power that would push bullets significantly off course if not properly compensated. She watched them through several cycles, reading the patterns, understanding the rhythm. The gusts came in waves, building and falling with regularity that could be predicted if you paid attention. Morrison continued. This is the highest difficulty station we offer. In my 22 years running this range, only 11% of shooters have achieved perfect scores at this distance. Most of those were using custom match rifles and hand-loaded ammunition specifically developed for long-range precision. His pause carried weight. Shooters on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Fire when ready. The range erupted in scattered fire. Marines engaged their targets with varying levels of confidence, some rushing through their strings, others taking deliberate time between shots. Reyes waited, watching the flags, feeling the wind, counting the rhythm in her mind. The first gust peaked and began to fall. The flags relaxed slightly. The heat shimmer steadied for a moment. Now, she worked through her 10 targets with the same mechanical precision she had demonstrated all morning. The crosshairs found each target. The wind compensation was calculated and applied. The trigger broke cleanly. The rifle recoiled consistently. Each shot was a repetition of the last, identical in execution, varied only by the specific conditions of each individual target engagement. When she cleared her weapon and stepped back from the line, 9 other Marines were still shooting. Phillips descended from the observation tower this time, carrying his spotting scope and walking directly to Lane 4. He did not score the other lanes first. He did not maintain his usual methodical progression. He went straight to her target and raised the scope to his eye. The silence around the range was absolute. Marines who had finished shooting stood frozen, watching. Marines who were still engaged with their targets rushed their final shots, unwilling to miss whatever was about to be revealed. Phillips held the scope steady for what felt like a full minute. Then he lowered it slowly, looked at Reyes with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something approaching disbelief, and keyed his radio. Lane 4. 15 rounds fired. 15 hits. All center mass. Group size 3.4 inches at 300 yards. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds before Morrison's voice came over the speakers. Lane 4 pass. Perfect score. For stations, for perfect scores. Expert qualification with highest marks. He paused, then added, Staff Sergeant Reyes, report to the observation tower immediately. The range remained silent as she gathered her equipment. Martinez stood with his mouth slightly open, his data book forgotten in his hands. Chin had stopped pretending to work on his gear and was simply staring. Davis looked like someone had just explained that gravity was optional. Thompson, who had failed at 100 yards and been sent to remedial training, had returned to watch the final station and now stood at the edge of the range with both hands on top of his head, his face a study in incomprehension. As Reyes walked toward the observation tower, carrying her worn rifle and her shooting bag, she passed a cluster of Marines who had gathered near the equipment shed. Their conversation died as she approached, but she caught fragments as she passed. That should not be possible, one was saying. The rifle alone, leaving aside everything else, that rifle should not be capable of those groups. Another responded quietly. Maybe we've been wrong about what makes a rifle capable. Maybe it's not about how new it is or how expensive it is. A third voice, harder and more resistant. No, there has to be an explanation. Equipment matters. It has to matter. She climbed the metal stairs to the observation tower, her boots ringing on each step. Morrison and Phillips were waiting at the top, their faces showing the expressions of professionals who had just witnessed something that challenged their understanding. The tower gave a clear view of the entire range, all the lanes stretching out in parallel lines, all the targets at their various distances. Morrison gestured to a chair, an informality that spoke volumes about the shift in dynamic. Sit, Staff Sergeant. Please. She sat, placing her rifle carefully across her lap, her hands resting on the worn stock with automatic familiarity. Phillips spoke first, his weathered face serious. Ma'am, in 34 years as a Marine, I have never seen shooting like what you demonstrated today. Not at any qualification. Not at any competition. Not in any combat situation I witnessed or heard about. He gestured at her rifle. And certainly not with equipment that looks like that. Morrison leaned against the observation desk, his clipboard set aside. I need to understand what I just saw. Not for any official reason. Not because I doubt your qualification. You passed every station with the highest marks possible. But because I need to know if what you just did can be taught. If it can be replicated. If there is something in your approach that we should be incorporating into our training programs. Reyes looked at both men, seeing genuine curiosity rather than skepticism now. Sirs, what I did today is not complicated. It just requires time and consistency. I shoot the same rifle with the same ammunition, using the same technique 5,000 times a year. I do not change my equipment. I do not chase new technology. I do not switch between different weapons. I know this one rifle better than most Marines know any piece of equipment they own. Phillips nodded slowly. The 5,000 rounds annually. That is more than most Marines fire in 5 years. Yes, Gunny. And every one of those rounds teaches me something about this rifle's characteristics. How it responds to temperature changes. How it handles different wind conditions. Where it shoots in humidity versus dry air. After 40,000 rounds, there are no surprises left. I know what it will do before I pull the trigger. Morrison made a note on his clipboard. The ammunition. You said you hand-load it. Why? Because factory ammunition varies too much, sir. Different lots have different velocities, different powder charges, different bullet weights within specification tolerances. Those variations don't matter much at 50 yards. At 300 yards, they matter significantly. Hand-loading eliminates that variation. Phillips pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees in a posture that suggested this had become a conversation rather than a debriefing. Ma'am, help me understand something. You said you know this rifle completely after 40,000 rounds. But most Marines, even dedicated marksmen, they qualify with their assigned weapon, and that's it. They might fire a few hundred rounds annually for practice. You're suggesting that's not enough? Reyes considered her words carefully, aware that what she said here might influence training programs and policy decisions. Gunny, knowing a rifle and being familiar with it are different things. Familiarity means you can operate it safely and hit targets at qualification distances. Knowledge means you understand its personality. You know that it shoots slightly left in cold weather. You know it prefers a specific cleaning interval. You know exactly how much holdover you need at 400 yards in a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind. That kind of knowledge only comes from extensive time with one specific weapon. Morrison had been listening quietly, his expression thoughtful. He picked up his clipboard again, flipping through pages of scores and statistics. Staff Sergeant, your scores today place you in the top 1% of all shooters who have qualified on this range in the past decade. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I see from your record that you deployed twice to Afghanistan. Did you use this rifle in combat? Yes, sir. Both deployments. 16 months total combat time. And it performed reliably under field conditions? Without a single malfunction, sir. I maintained it carefully, but it never failed me. Not in dust storms. Not in extreme heat. Not in situations where my life depended on it functioning perfectly. Phillips exchanged glances with Morrison, something passing between them that spoke of shared experience and understanding. The captain stood and walked to the observation window, looking out over the range where Marines were still processing what they had witnessed. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to ask you something that may seem unusual. Would you be willing to conduct a demonstration shoot for the other Marines? Not as part of their qualification, but as a training opportunity. Show them your technique. Explain your approach. Let them see how you read wind and make corrections. Reyes felt surprise register in her chest, carefully controlled but present. Sir, I'm not an instructor. I'm just a Marine who spent a lot of time practicing. Morrison turned back to face her, his expression serious. You're a Marine who just demonstrated the highest level of marksmanship skill I've seen in over 2 decades. That makes you exactly the kind of instructor we need. He gestured toward the range below. Right now, those Marines down there are questioning everything they thought they knew about shooting. Some of them are making excuses. Some are claiming equipment doesn't matter. Some are saying you must have some secret advantage. What they need is someone to show them the truth. That excellence comes from dedication and consistency, not from expensive equipment. Phillips added, we have another qualification group scheduled for next week. 24 Marines. If you could spend one day demonstrating and explaining your techniques, I believe it would fundamentally change how they approach marksmanship training. She looked at both men, seeing the sincerity in their faces, understanding the opportunity they were offering. Sir, Gunny, I would be honored, but I need to be clear about something. What I do is not magic. It's not even particularly complicated. It's just the result of showing up to the range every weekend for 8 years and doing the same things the same way until they become automatic. Most Marines won't commit to that level of practice. Morrison nodded. You're probably right. Most won't. But if even a few of them take your example seriously, if even a handful decide to invest that time and dedication, we'll have better marksmen in the Corps. That's worth the effort. Philip stood, extending his hand. Ma'am, thank you for what you demonstrated today. You've given these Marines something to think about. You've given me something to think about. I've been teaching marksmanship for 18 years, and I learned more watching you shoot today than I have in the past 5 years of courses and seminars. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of decades spent handling weapons and equipment. Thank you, Gunny. That means a great deal coming from you. Morrison walked her to the tower stairs, his demeanor still professional, but with a new quality of respect that had been absent when she first arrived. Staff Sergeant, before you go, one more question. That rifle, you built it yourself over time, you said. How much did the total investment cost you? She calculated quickly, adding up years of components and modifications. Approximately $1,200, sir, spread over 8 years. That includes the base rifle, the custom barrel work, the trigger upgrade, the stock modifications, and the scope. Morrison wrote the number down, his eyebrows lifting slightly. $1,200 and 8 years of consistent practice. Meanwhile, we have Marines spending $3,000 on the latest match rifles and firing them twice a year. He shook his head slowly. The priorities seem misaligned. Yes, sir. Though I would note that any reliable rifle can achieve what mine does if the shooter invests the time to lure it completely. The expensive equipment helps, but it's not the determining factor. The determining factor is always the person behind the rifle. She descended the tower stairs and found a small crowd waiting at the bottom. Martinez, Chun, Davis, and half a dozen other Marines stood in a loose semicircle, their expressions ranging from curiosity to residual disbelief. Martinez stepped forward, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet that had fallen, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your equipment. That was unprofessional and wrong." He gestured at the other Marines. "We all did. Your shooting today was the most impressive demonstration of marksmanship skill I've ever witnessed." Chun nodded agreement. "Ma'am, I was wondering if you might be willing to answer some questions about your techniques, your approach, how you read the wind so accurately." Davis, who had been the most vocal skeptic that morning, stood slightly apart from the group. His face showed the struggle of someone whose fundamental assumptions have been challenged and found wanting. "Staff Sergeant," he said slowly, "I spent $2,000 on my rifle last year. Top-of-the-line equipment, match-grade barrel, competition trigger, custom stock, and you outshot me with a weapon that looks like it belongs in a museum." He paused, clearly working through something difficult. "What am I doing wrong?" Reyes set down her equipment bag and faced the group, seeing genuine desire to learn in their faces. "Corporal Davis, you're not doing anything wrong. Your equipment is excellent. But equipment is only part of the equation. Tell me, how many rounds have you fired through that rifle since you bought it?" He hesitated. "Maybe 300 rounds? I qualified twice and did some practice sessions." "And did you fire those 300 rounds with the same ammunition each time?" "No, ma'am. I used different brands. Whatever was available at the time." She nodded, her voice taking on the patient tone of teaching. "There's your answer. You have excellent equipment that you barely know. I have adequate equipment that I know intimately. 300 rounds is enough to verify that a rifle functions. It's nowhere near enough to understand how that specific rifle behaves under different conditions. You need thousands of rounds with consistent ammunition before you truly know a weapon." Martinez asked, "Ma'am, the 5,000 rounds annually that you mentioned, that must be expensive. How do you afford that much practice?" "I hand-load my ammunition, which reduces costs significantly, and I prioritize it in my budget because it matters to me. Some Marines spend money on vehicles or entertainment. I spend mine on components and range time. It's a choice about what you value and what you're willing to sacrifice for it." Chin was taking notes on a small pad he had pulled from his pocket. "Ma'am, the wind reading. How did you learn to read conditions so accurately? Is there a specific technique, or is it just experience?" Reyes glanced at the flags along the range, their fabrics snapping in the afternoon wind that had picked up since the qualification ended. "It's both technique and experience, Corporal Chun. The technique can be taught quickly. Watch the flags at different distances. Observe how the wind affects grass and dust. Feel it against your face and correlate that sensation with what you see. That part takes maybe an hour to understand intellectually." She paused, watching the Marines lean in slightly, their attention completely focused now. But actually reading wind accurately under pressure, that takes thousands of repetitions. Your brain needs to process wind indicators automatically, without conscious thought, the same way you process breathing or walking. That only comes from extensive practice in varied conditions. I've shot in calm air, in gusting crosswinds, in conditions where the wind changed direction midstring. Each situation taught me something new. A lance corporal she didn't recognize raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, when you were shooting today, I noticed you waited between some shots, like you were timing something. What were you watching for?" "Good observation. I was watching the wind pattern. Wind rarely blows at constant speed. It comes in waves, cycles of stronger and weaker periods. If you watch long enough, you can identify the pattern. At 300 yards today, the gusts were peaking every 40 seconds or so. I timed my shots to fall during the lulls when the wind was lightest and most predictable. That reduces the correction I need to make and increases accuracy." Martinez shook his head slowly, his expression showing someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. "Ma'am, that's the kind of detail they don't teach in basic marksmanship courses." "How'd you learn that?" "By paying attention and keeping notes. After every range session, I write down what I observed. Wind patterns, temperature effects, how my rifle performed, what worked and what didn't. Over 8 years, those notes have become a complete reference guide for almost any shooting condition I might encounter." Davis had been listening quietly, his face still showing the struggle of reconciling his expensive equipment with her superior results. "Staff Sergeant," he said finally, his voice careful, "if you were starting over today, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?" She considered the question seriously, respecting his genuine desire to understand. "I wouldn't change much, Corporal. Maybe I would have started hand-loading ammunition earlier. That would have accelerated my learning curve. But the core approach, shooting one rifle consistently with disciplined practice and careful observation, that's the foundation. Everything else is just refinement." Phillips appeared at the edge of the group, his presence causing the Marines to straighten slightly. He had been observing from a distance, but now stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Reyes has agreed to conduct a demonstration next week for the incoming qualification group. I want all of you who qualify today to attend as well. Consider it professional development. You'll have the opportunity to observe her technique in detail and ask questions." Chin looked up from his note-taking. "Gunny, will she be using the same rifle?" Phillips smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Reyes had seen on his weathered face all day. "The same rifle. The one that looks like it survived 3 wars but shoots better than anything else on this range. I want next week's group to see exactly what Staff Sergeant Reyes demonstrated today. That equipment matters far less than dedication and consistency." Martinez addressed Reyes directly. "Ma'am, in the tower, when you were talking with Captain Morrison and Gunny Phillips, what were they asking about?" "They wanted to understand my approach, whether it could be taught, whether there was anything in my techniques that should be incorporated into training programs." She gestured at the group around her. "The same things you're asking now. How someone with old equipment outperformed Marines with the latest technology." A staff sergeant who had been standing at the back of the group spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of rank and experience. "Ma'am, I qualified today, but my scores were barely passing. I've been shooting for 12 years, and I thought I understood marksmanship. Watching you today showed me how much I don't know. Would you be willing to look at my data book and tell me what I might be doing wrong?" Reyes nodded. "Of course. Let me secure my equipment, and I'll be happy to review it with you." The group began to disperse slowly, Marines returning to their gear and their own debriefing conversations. But the dynamic had shifted fundamentally from the morning. Where there had been mockery and dismissal, there was now respect and curiosity. Where there had been assumptions about equipment determining capability, there was now understanding that the shooter mattered more than the rifle. Davis lingered after the others had moved away, his expensive rifle slung over his shoulder in a way that suggested he was seeing it differently now. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need to say something. This morning, I bet $20 that you would wash out. I was wrong in every possible way. Not just about your shooting, but about what I thought made a good marksman. I've been focused on equipment upgrades and technology, thinking that was the path to improvement. You show me that I've been looking at everything backwards. Reyes met his eyes, seeing genuine humility there. Corporal, your equipment is excellent. You haven't wasted your money, but now you have an opportunity to learn that equipment thoroughly. Commit to shooting it regularly. Use consistent ammunition. Keep detailed notes. In a year, with dedicated practice, you'll be shooting scores that surprise you. He nodded slowly. Ma'am, would it be appropriate if I contacted you occasionally for advice? I mean, if I have questions as I'm working through this learning process? She considered, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a card with her contact information. If you're serious about improving, I'm happy to help. But understand that help means pointing you toward hard work and long practice sessions. There are no shortcuts. Davis took the card carefully, handling it like something valuable. I understand, ma'am. Thank you. As he walked away, Thompson approached from the remedial training area. He had failed at 100 yards that morning and spent the day working with an instructor on basic techniques. His face showed exhaustion and frustration, but also something else. Determination, perhaps a renewed purpose. Staff Sergeant, he said, coming to attention with formal precision, I failed today because I haven't been taking marksmanship seriously. I thought showing up twice a year was enough. I thought my equipment would compensate for lack of practice. Watching you shoot perfect scores with a rifle that looks like that, he gestured vaguely. It made me realize how wrong I've been about everything. She returned his bearing with equal formality. Corporal Thompson, failing a qualification is not the end of your career. It's information. It tells you where you need to focus your training. The question is what you do with that information. I want to do what you do, ma'am. The consistent practice. The detailed observation. Learning one rifle completely instead of constantly changing equipment. I've already contacted the range manager at my home station. I'm signing up for weekly practice sessions starting next month. I'm done making excuses. Good. That's the right response to failure. Use it as motivation rather than defeat. She paused, then added, if you commit to that practice schedule and maintain it for 6 months, contact me. I'll review your progress and provide specific feedback. His face showed surprised gratitude. Ma'am, that would be invaluable. Thank you. Morrison's voice carried across the range from the observation tower, amplified by the speaker system. All Marines, equipment secure and prepare for depart. Range is closing in 15 minutes. Staff Sergeant Reyes, final debriefing in my office at your convenience. She gathered her rifle and shooting bag, moving through the familiar routine of securing her equipment. The rifle went into its case with the same care she had shown that morning. Decades of practice translated into automatic motions that ensured nothing was forgotten or mishandled. Around her, other Marines were packing their gear with less certainty, some of them glancing at her equipment with new understanding. Chin approached one final time, his notebook still in hand. Ma'am, one last question if I may. The 40,000 rounds through this rifle. Has the barrel degradation affected accuracy at all? Not measurably. The barrel was hand-lapped by a master gunsmith who specialized in precision rifle work. The bore is extremely smooth and properly stress-relieved. With proper maintenance and careful cleaning techniques, a quality barrel can last significantly longer than most people assume. I check it regularly with a bore scope. There's throat erosion, certainly, but it's even and predictable. I adjust my loads accordingly. So you're saying the rifle hasn't degraded. You just learned to work with its changing characteristics as it ages. Exactly. Most shooters treat aging as failure. I treat it as evolution. The rifle today is different from the rifle 8 years ago, but it's not worse. It's just different, and I understand those differences completely. Morrison's office was small and utilitarian, walls covered with range safety posters and qualification records dating back years. The captain sat behind a metal desk that had seen better decades, his uniform jacket hanging on a coat rack in the corner. Phillips stood near the window, looking out over the range where maintenance crews were already setting up for the next day's training. Both men turned as Reyes entered, and Morrison gestured to a chair positioned across from his desk. Sit, Staff Sergeant. This won't take long, but I wanted to speak with you privately before you departed. She sat, her worn rifle case resting against the chair leg, her posture professional but relaxed. The tension of the qualification had passed, replaced by the calm that followed completed challenges. Morrison pulled a file from his desk drawer and opened it, scanning pages that Reyes recognized as her service record. I took the liberty of reviewing your complete file after your performance today. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. Combat Action Ribon. Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device. Expert rifle qualification every year since you entered service. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. What I don't see here is any advanced marksmanship training. No scout sniper school. No designated marksman course. No competitive shooting background. Just consistent expert qualifications. That's correct, sir. I never attended formal advanced marksmanship schools. Everything I know came from personal practice and self-study. Phillips turned from the window, his weathered face showing something between respect and disbelief. Ma'am, Scout Sniper School is 13 weeks of intensive training. It produces some of the finest marksmen in the military. Yet you're shooting at a level that equals or exceeds most Scout Sniper graduates, and you achieved it through weekend practice sessions over 8 years. Reyes chose her words carefully, aware that her response might influence decisions beyond this conversation. Gunny, formal schools are valuable. They provide structure, expert instruction, and concentrated learning. But they also have time limits. 13 weeks is intensive, but it's still just 13 weeks. I've had 8 years of consistent practice, 400 weekends, thousands of hours behind this rifle. Time and repetition can substitute for formal instruction if the commitment is genuine. Morrison leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking slightly under his weight. That's the conversation I wanted to have. Time and commitment. The Marine Corps invests significant resources in formal marksmanship programs. We send Marines to expensive schools. We purchase advanced equipment. We develop complex training curricula. Yet you've demonstrated that dedicated individual practice with basic equipment can produce equal or better results. That challenges some fundamental assumptions about how we approach marksmanship training. Phillips added, the question we're wrestling with is whether your approach can be scaled. Can we take your methodology and apply it across the Corps? Or are you an outlier, someone with natural talent and unusual dedication that can't be replicated? She considered the question seriously, understanding its implications for training policy and resource allocation. Sir, Gunny, I believe my approach can be taught, but I'm not certain it can be mandated. What I do requires personal investment of time and money that most Marines won't voluntarily commit. I spend my weekends at the range instead of with family or friends. I spend my disposable income on ammunition and components instead of entertainment. That's a choice about priorities, and you can't order someone to change their priorities. Morrison nodded slowly, making notes on a pad. But we could create opportunities, provide better access to ranges, subsidize ammunition for Marines who commit to regular practice schedules, develop mentorship programs where experienced shooters guide newer Marines, make it easier for those who want to pursue excellence to do so. That would certainly help, sir. The biggest barrier most Marines face is not lack of desire, but lack of access. Many don't have nearby ranges where they can practice regularly. Ammunition is expensive. Time is limited with family obligations and unit requirements. If the Corps could reduce those barriers, you would see more Marines achieving higher skill levels. Phillips walked to the desk and picked up a document that had been sitting there. Ma'am, Captain Morrison and I have drafted a proposal. It's preliminary, subject to approval from higher command, but we wanted your input before submitting it. The concept is to establish a marksmanship excellence program. Marines who commit to regular documented practice, maintain detailed training logs, and demonstrate progressive improvement would receive support in the form of range access, subsidized ammunition, and dedicated coaching from experienced shooters like yourself. Reyes felt surprise register again, more strongly this time. Coaching? Sir, I'm not an instructor. Morrison smiled slightly, the expression transforming his usually stern features. Staff Sergeant, You spent the last hour teaching a group of Marines more about practical marksmanship than most of them learned in their entire careers. You explained complex concepts in clear terms. You answered questions with patience and detail. You demonstrated techniques and provided actionable guidance. That's teaching, regardless of whether you have formal instructor credentials. Phillips continued, "We're proposing to bring you on as a visiting instructor for quarterly training cycles. 1 week per quarter, you would work with Marines going through qualification courses. Demonstrate techniques. Provide individual coaching. Share your methodology. The goal would be to create a cadre of Marines who understand that excellence comes from dedication rather than equipment." She looked at both men, seeing the sincerity in their faces, understanding the opportunity they were offering, but also recognizing the challenges. "Sirs, I'm honored by the proposal. Truly. But I need to be honest about something. What I did today, those perfect scores, they're the result of 8 years of consistent work. I can teach the techniques. I can explain the theory. I can demonstrate the approach. But I cannot give Marines 8 years of experience in a week-long course. Results like mine take time that most people won't invest." Morrison's expression remained serious, but not discouraged. "We understand that, Staff Sergeant. We're not expecting to create a range full of perfect score shooters in a week. What we're hoping for is to change the culture around marksmanship training. Right now, most Marines view qualification as a checkbox requirement. Show up twice a year, meet minimum standards, move on. We want to create a culture where Marines understand that true marksmanship excellence is achievable through dedication, where they see examples like yours and think, I could do that if I committed to the work." Phillips added, "Even if only 5% of Marines take your example seriously and commit to regular practice, that's a significant improvement in overall marksmanship capability across the Corps. And those 5% become examples for the next generation, creating a cascading effect over time." Reyes nodded slowly, seeing the logic in their approach. "When you frame it that way, sirs, I will be privileged to participate. If my experience can help even a few Marines improve their capabilities, the time investment is worthwhile." Morrison made a note on his pad, satisfaction evident in his posture. "Excellent. I'll submit the proposal through channels. Phillips will coordinate the scheduling if it's approved. In the meantime, you're confirmed for next week's demonstration. 24 Marines, fresh group, most of them coming from units that barely meet minimum qualification standards. They need to see what's possible." Phillips returned to his position by the window, his voice taking on a thoughtful quality. "Ma'am, one thing that struck me today. Your rifle. It looks terrible by conventional standards. Worn finish, visible wear, nothing aesthetic about it. It performs better than rifles that cost 3 times as much and look pristine. There's a lesson in that beyond just marksmanship, about not judging capability by appearance, about understanding that value comes from function rather than aesthetics. That's been my experience, Gunny, in equipment and in people. Some of the finest Marines I've served with looked rough around the edges. Some of the least effective had perfect uniforms and polished gear. What matters is capability under pressure, not appearance in garrison." Morrison stood, extending his hand across the desk. "Staff Sergeant, thank you for your time today and for your willingness to participate in this program. You've given us a lot to think about regarding how we approach marksmanship training. And you've given those Marines on the range today something they'll remember for the rest of their careers. The day they watch someone with a beat-up rifle outshoot everyone with the latest equipment." She shook his hand, then Phillips, feeling the respect in both grips. "Thank you, sirs, for the opportunity and for understanding what I was trying to demonstrate." As she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, Morrison called after her. "Staff Sergeant, one final thing. That rifle. Have you ever considered what you'll do when it finally wears out? When the barrel is gone and the action is shot?" She paused at the door, looking back at both men. "Sir, if that day comes, I'll rebuild it. Same action if possible. Same stock. New barrel hand-lapped by the same gunsmith. I'll keep the core of what I know and replace only what's necessary. Then I'll start the learning process again, Thousands of rounds until I know the new configuration as completely as I know this one. The following week arrived with typical California weather, clear skies, and moderate temperatures that would make for good shooting conditions. Reyes arrived at the range 2 hours before the scheduled qualification, wanting to set up her demonstration station and prepare her equipment before the new group of Marines appeared. Phillips was already there, arranging targets and checking range equipment with the careful attention of someone who had done this thousands of times. "Morning, ma'am," he called as she approached. "Your demonstration lane is set up at lane 1. Gives everyone clear sight lines to observe your technique. I've also arranged for a large monitor connected to a spotting scope so the group can see your target in real time as you shoot." She appreciated the thoughtfulness, understanding how technology could enhance the learning experience. "That will help significantly, Gunny. Being able to see impact points as they happen will make the wind reading discussion much more concrete." Phillips walked with her to lane 1, carrying a folder thick with paperwork. "I briefed the incoming group yesterday, told them they would be observing a demonstration by a Marine who shot perfect scores through all 4 qualification stations using personal equipment. I did not mention what your rifle looks like." He smiled slightly, the weathered creases around his eyes deepening. "I'm curious to see their reactions when they realize you're shooting that worn rifle." She set down her equipment case and began her setup routine, the familiar motions calming in their predictability. "Gunny, did you tell them why I shoot perfect scores? The practice routine, the consistency, the time investment?" I gave them the overview. 5,000 rounds annually over 8 years. Same rifle, same ammunition, disciplined practice. But I think they need to hear the details from you directly. Numbers on paper don't have the same impact as hearing someone explain their actual process. The new group began arriving 30 minutes before the scheduled start time. 24 Marines of varying ranks and experience levels. Reyes watched them assemble near the range house, noting their equipment. Most carried standard issue M4 service rifles. A few had brought personal weapons, though none looked as worn as hers. Their conversations carried across the morning air, filled with the nervous energy that preceded qualifications. Morrison appeared from his office, clipboard in hand, his voice carrying authority as he called the group to formation. "Marines, attention. Today's qualification will include an initial demonstration by Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes. She will shoot 1 complete qualification course while explaining her techniques and approach. You will observe, take notes, and ask questions. Following the demonstration, you will complete your own qualification courses. This is a learning opportunity. Take it seriously." He gestured toward lane 1, where Reyes stood beside her equipment. Staff Sergeant Reyes shot perfect scores last week through all 4 stations. 4 stations, 60 rounds fired, 60 hits, all center mass. She did this using personal equipment that she has maintained for 8 years. Her approach challenges conventional thinking about what makes a successful marksman. Pay attention. The group moved to the observation area Phillips had set up, a semicircle of chairs positioned to give clear views of lane 1 and the monitor displaying the target camera feed. Reyes saw their eyes move to her rifle case, still closed, their expressions showing curiosity mixed with the standard pre-qualification anxiety. She stepped forward, her voice calm and clear, pitched to carry without shouting. "Good morning, Marines. My name is Staff Sergeant Reyes. Before we begin, I want to establish something important. Nothing I'm about to demonstrate is magic. Nothing requires special talent. Everything you'll see today is the result of disciplined practice and consistent effort over an extended period. If you're willing to invest the time, you can achieve similar results." She unzipped her rifle case and withdrew the weapon, holding it up for the group to see clearly. "This is the rifle I'll be using for today's demonstration. It's 8 years old. It has approximately 43,000 rounds through the barrel. The finish is worn. The stock is scratched. It looks, by conventional standards, like something that should be retired." The murmuring started immediately, exactly as Phillips had predicted. Marines leaned toward each other, their whispered comments audible in fragments. "Is she serious? That thing looks ancient. How is she supposed to shoot perfect scores with that? A lance corporal in the front row raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, why do you use that rifle instead of something newer? Because I know this rifle completely. She walked closer to the group, the weapon cradled professionally across her arms. I know that it shoots slightly left in temperatures below 50 degrees. I know it prefers a specific powder charge and bullet weight. I know exactly how it responds to different wind conditions. I know where we'll place a shot before I pull the trigger. That knowledge came from thousands of hours and tens of thousands of rounds. If I switch to a new rifle, even a better one by objective standards, I would be starting over. I would be giving up 8 years of accumulated understanding. A sergeant near the back spoke up, his voice skeptical but not hostile. Ma'am, with respect, equipment has to matter. We're issued modern rifles for a reason. Technology improves. Manufacturing quality improves. How can an 80-year-old rifle with 40,000 rounds compete with current equipment? Valid question, Sergeant. Equipment does matter. Modern rifles are excellent. But equipment is only one factor in marksmanship, and it's not the most important factor. She gestured toward the range. Over the next hour, I'm going to demonstrate that the shooter matters far more than the rifle. Your equipment, the rifles you're carrying today, they're all capable of shooting expert-level scores. The question is whether you've invested the time to learn them well enough to achieve that capability. Morrison stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Marines, I watched Staff Sergeant Reyes shoot last week. I've been running qualification courses for 22 years. What she demonstrated was the most impressive marksmanship I've witnessed in my career. Not because of her equipment, because of her discipline, her preparation, and her fundamental understanding of shooting principles. He paused, letting the words settle. Everything you're about to see is replicable if you're willing to do the work. Phillips activated the target monitor, and the image of the 50-yard target appeared on the large screen, clear and detailed. Staff Sergeant, whenever you're ready. Reyes moved to the firing line, settling into her standing position with the economy of motion that came from endless repetition. Before I fire, watch the wind flags. She pointed toward the markers positioned along the range. They're barely moving. Wind is under 2 miles per hour from left to right. At 50 yards, that's negligible. No correction needed. Watch my breathing pattern. I'll fire during the natural respiratory pause after exhaling. The group leaned forward, attention focused completely now. On the monitor, the target waited, pristine white with its black center mass circle. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, the movement smooth and practiced. The sight picture formed, crosshairs settling with minimal wobble on the center of the target. First shot, she said calmly. Trigger press is straight back. No jerking. Smooth pressure until the rifle fires. The report echoed across the range, sharp and clean. On the monitor, a hole appeared in the target, perfectly centered in the black circle. Before anyone could react, she was already engaging the second target, her movements fluid and efficient. 5 shots in 7 seconds, each one placed with the mechanical precision of a machine, each impact visible on the monitor in real time. She stepped back from the line and safed her weapon, turning to face the group. 5 shots, 5 hits. That's the standard for 50-yard standing. The key elements are proper breathing, steady position, and smooth trigger press. Nothing complicated, nothing that requires years of training. Just fundamentals executed correctly. The lance corporal who had asked the first question raised his hand again. Ma'am, you made that look easy. But when I shoot standing, my sight picture wobbles. My groups open up. How do you keep the rifle so steady? She smiled slightly, appreciating the observation. My sight picture wobbles too. Everyone's does. The human body cannot hold perfectly still while standing. The key is managing the wobble, keeping it small and centered, and pressing the trigger during a moment when the sight picture is aligned correctly. That skill comes from practice. The first 100 times I shot standing, my groups were terrible. After 1,000 repetitions, they improved. After 10,000, they became consistent. A corporal near the middle of the group spoke up, his voice carrying a note of challenge. Ma'am, standing position at 50 yards is the easiest station. Everyone passes that. The real test is the longer distances. Can you demonstrate 200 yards sitting? That's where most people struggle. Reasonable request, Corporal. She checked her watch. We have time before your scheduled qualification starts. Let me show you 200 yards sitting and explain the differences in technique. She moved to her shooting mat, settling into the sitting position with practiced efficiency. The monitor switched to display the 200-yard target, smaller and more distant than the 50-yard version. At this distance, Reyes began, environmental factors become more significant. Wind has more time to affect bullet flight. Temperature affects powder burn rate and therefore velocity. Heat shimmer can distort your sight picture. She pointed toward the wind flag's position between her firing position and the distant target. Watch the flags at different distances. The flag at 100 yards is moving differently than the flag at 200 yards. That tells you the wind is not consistent across the range. You need to read the conditions where your bullet will be, not where you are. The group shifted their attention to the flags, several Marines squinting to see the subtle differences in movement. The corporal who had challenged her spoke again. Ma'am, how do you know which flag matters most? All of them matter, but the flags closest to the target have the most influence. The bullet is moving slowest there, giving wind more time to push it off course. I weight my corrections based on conditions in the final third of the flight path. She settled deeper into her position, the rifle finding its natural point of aim. But the real skill is reading patterns rather than individual gusts. Watch. For 30 seconds she remained still, the rifle steady against her shoulder, her breathing slow and controlled. The group watched in silence, following her gaze toward the distant flags. The wind was variable, gusting and falling in irregular patterns that would challenge even experienced shooters. There, she said quietly. The pattern just completed cycle. Stronger gust followed by a lull. If the cycle repeats, and it usually does, I have about 15 seconds of lighter wind coming. That's my shooting window. The flags began to settle, their frantic snapping softening to gentler movement. She engaged the first target, the rifle's report sharp in the morning air. On the monitor, the hit appeared center mass. Second target. Third. Fourth. She worked through her string during the lull. Each shot timed to the rhythm she had identified. When the wind began building again, she was already clear, her weapons safe, her targets all engaged. Phillips called the results over the speaker system. 8 targets, 8 hits, all center mass. Group size 3.1 inches. The skepticism in the group had shifted noticeably. Marines were leaning forward, taking notes, asking questions with genuine interest rather than challenge. The sergeant who had questioned her earlier raised his hand. Ma'am, that wind reading technique. How long did it take you to develop that skill? Years of practice in different conditions. I keep a detailed log of every range session. Wind speed, direction, temperature, how my rifle performed, what corrections worked. Over time, patterns emerge. You learn that certain wind conditions repeat. Certain corrections prove reliable. But it requires shooting in varied conditions, not just on calm days when everything is easy. A staff sergeant she recognized from the earlier group, one of Morrison's range cadre, stepped forward. Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to try something. I want to shoot the same string immediately after you, using my rifle. It's brand new, latest model, expensive optics. If equipment doesn't matter as much as you're suggesting, my score should be similar to yours. She nodded, appreciating the test. Good idea, Staff Sergeant. That will demonstrate the point more effectively than any explanation I can provide. The Staff Sergeant, whose name tag Red Henderson, moved to lane 2 with his rifle. The weapon looked pristine, black finish gleaming, scope mounted with precision rails and expensive rings. He settled into shooting position with competent familiarity, someone who had qualified expert multiple times. Morrison's voice carried instruction. Staff Sergeant Henderson, engage 8 targets at 200 yards, sitting position. Same conditions as Staff Sergeant Reyes just shot. Wind is currently 3 to 5 miles per hour, variable. Henderson took his time, clearly trying to apply the wind-reading technique Reyes had just demonstrated. He watched the flags, waited for a pattern, began his string when conditions seemed favorable. His shots were careful, deliberate, showing solid fundamentals and professional competence. When he finished and stepped back, Phillips scored his target. 8 targets, 6 hits, 2 misses. Hits are scattered across the target. Group size 8.4 inches. Henderson stared at the monitor displaying his target, his expression showing confusion and frustration. I don't understand. My rifle is newer. Better scope. Better trigger. I shot the same way she did, waited for the wind lull, applied the same fundamentals. Why did my group open up like that? Reyes moved to stand beside him, her voice taking on the patient tone of teaching. May I see your rifle, Staff Sergeant? He handed it over, and she examined it carefully, checking the action, testing the trigger, looking through the scope. This is excellent equipment. Well-maintained, properly configured. Nothing wrong with the rifle. She handed it back. How many rounds have you fired through it? Maybe 200. I bought it 3 months ago. Haven't had much range time since then. There's your answer. 200 rounds is barely broken in. You don't know this rifle yet. You don't know if it shoots slightly high or low at different temperatures. You don't know its preferred ammunition. You don't know how it responds to wind. She gestured at her worn rifle. I have 43,000 rounds through mine. That's the difference. Not the equipment quality. The depth of familiarity. The Lance Corporal raised his hand again. Ma'am, so you're saying we should stop upgrading our equipment and just shoot more with what we have? Not exactly. Good equipment is valuable. Modern rifles are excellent. But buying new equipment won't make you a better shooter unless you invest time learning that equipment thoroughly. She addressed the full group now, her voice carrying clearly. The temptation is to blame your rifle when your scores aren't what you want. To think that if you just had better equipment, you'd shoot better. But equipment is rarely the limiting factor. Time and practice are the limiting factors. Morrison stepped forward, his expression serious. Marines, what you're seeing here is the difference between equipment knowledge and equipment ownership. Most of you own your rifles. Staff Sergeant Reyes knows hers. That distinction matters more than any specification sheet or price tag. Henderson was studying his rifle with new perspective, his earlier confidence replaced by thoughtful assessment. Ma'am, if I committed to regular practice, how long before I would know my rifle the way you know yours? Depends on how regular your practice is. If you shoot 5,000 rounds annually with consistent ammunition and careful observation, I'd say 2 to 3 years before you develop deep familiarity. But even 1,000 rounds annually with good note-taking will produce significant improvement over time. The key is consistency and attention to detail. Phillips checked his watch and signaled to Morrison. Sir, we need to begin the official qualification in 20 minutes. The captain nodded and addressed the group. Marines, you've seen the demonstration. You've heard the explanation. Now you have the opportunity to apply what you learned. Remember that Staff Sergeant Reyes isn't superhuman. She's simply disciplined and consistent. Those are qualities every Marine can develop if they choose to invest the effort. A corporal near the back raised his hand. Sir, after we qualify today, is there any way to get additional coaching from Staff Sergeant Reyes? Or access to the practice program you mentioned last week? Morrison glanced at Reyes, who nodded slightly. The Marksmanship Excellence Program is still being finalized through command channels. But Staff Sergeant Reyes has agreed to make herself available for mentorship to Marines who demonstrate genuine commitment to improvement. If you maintain regular practice schedules, document your training, and show progressive development, she'll provide guidance. The group's energy had transformed completely from the skeptical nervousness of an hour earlier. Marines were discussing wind-reading techniques, comparing notes, asking each other questions about practice schedules and ammunition selection. Henderson was still examining his expensive rifle with new understanding, his face showing someone reassessing fundamental assumptions. Reyes began packing her equipment as the Marines moved to their assigned lanes for qualification. Phillips approached, his weathered face showing satisfaction. Ma'am, that was exactly what they needed to see. Not just perfect scores, but the explanation of how those scores are achieved. You gave them a roadmap they can actually follow. Thank you, Gunny. Though I suspect most won't follow it. The work is too demanding for casual interest. He nodded agreement. Most won't, but some will. Maybe 5 or 6 from this group will take it seriously. That's 5 or 6 Marines who will shoot better, serve more effectively, and potentially mentor others in turn. The effect compounds over time. Morrison joined them, clipboard in hand. Staff Sergeant, excellent demonstration. Clear explanations, patient responses, practical examples. He made a note on his paperwork. I'm submitting the instructor program proposal today with strong endorsement. Based on what I just observed, you have a natural teaching ability that should be utilized formally. She felt unexpected pride at the recognition, understanding that her years of solitary practice were now contributing to something larger than personal achievement. Sir, I appreciate the confidence. I'll do whatever I can to support the program. As the Marines settled into their qualification positions, she noticed several of them taking extra time to study the wind flags, applying the techniques she had just demonstrated. Henderson was watching the flags with intense focus, clearly trying to identify the patterns she had described. The Lance Corporal who had asked multiple questions was writing detailed notes in a small notebook, documenting observations about conditions and corrections. Phillips spoke quietly, almost to himself. You know what the real lesson is today? It's not about rifle maintenance or ammunition selection or wind reading. Those are all important, but they're symptoms of the underlying principle. The lesson is that excellence requires humility, the willingness to admit you don't know everything and commit to continuous learning. Most Marines are too proud to admit their equipment knowledge is superficial. You showed them that true confidence comes from deep competence, not surface appearance. The qualification proceeded with unusual focus from a group. Marines who typically rushed through their strings were taking deliberate time, watching wind flags, applying the techniques Reyes had demonstrated. The morning air filled with measured rifle fire rather than the hurried cadence that usually marked qualification courses. Phillips moved between lanes with his spotting scope, calling scores that showed noticeable improvement from typical sessions. Henderson finished his qualification and approached Reyes at the observation area, his expression showing a mix of frustration and determination. Ma'am, I just shot my best scores ever at this range. 7 hits at 200 yards, 8 at 300. Personal records for both distances, but they're still nowhere near what you demonstrated. His grip tightened on his expensive rifle. I need to understand what I'm missing beyond just round count. She gestured for him to sit, recognizing genuine desire to learn rather than defensive ego. Staff Sergeant, your fundamentals are solid. Your equipment is excellent. What you're missing is predictive knowledge. When I look at wind conditions, I don't just see current state. I see how they're likely to change in the next 30 seconds based on patterns I've observed thousands of times. When I settle into shooting position, my body automatically adjusts to the exact configuration that works for this rifle. Those capabilities come from repetition beyond conscious thought. He nodded slowly, processing the explanation. So there's no shortcut, no technique I can learn today that replaces years of practice. No shortcut, but understanding that is actually valuable. Most Marines waste time looking for quick fixes, special techniques, equipment advantages. You're accepting that real improvement requires sustained effort. That awareness puts you ahead of where I was at your experience level. The Lance Corporal who had been taking detailed notes throughout the demonstration approached tentatively, his notebook open to pages filled with observations and diagrams. Ma'am, I documented everything you explained about wind reading and timing. I also wrote down the practice schedule you mentioned. 5,000 rounds annually, consistent ammunition, detailed logging. I want to commit to that program. Would you be willing to review my progress periodically? She appreciated his initiative, seeing the same dedication she had brought to her own development. What's your name? Lance Corporal? Rivera, ma'am. I've been in 3 years, qualify expert every time, but I know my scores could be better. Watching you today showed me how much further I can go if I'm willing to do the work. All right, Rivera. Here's what I want you to do. Start keeping a detailed training log. Every range session, record date, time, temperature, wind conditions, ammunition used, and results. Document what worked and what didn't. After 3 months of consistent practice, send me your logs. I'll review them and provide specific feedback based on what I see in your data. His face brightened with genuine enthusiasm. Ma'am, thank you. That's exactly the guidance I need. Morrison called ceasefire for the final station, and the Marines began securing their equipment. Phillips tabulated final scores, his voice carrying results over the speaker system. The statistics were remarkable compared to typical qualification sessions. 18 Marines had qualified expert, the highest percentage Morrison had seen in years. 4 more had qualified sharpshooter, respectable scores that indicated solid fundamentals. Only 2 had failed to meet minimum standards, both of them struggling with basic marksmanship issues that required remedial training beyond what the demonstration could address. Phillips approached with his scoring sheets, his weathered face showing satisfaction. Ma'am, whatever you did this morning, it worked. 75% expert qualification rate. Our typical rate is maybe 30%. These Marines absorbed your lessons and applied them immediately. Morrison joined them, reviewing the statistics with professional interest. Staff Sergeant Reyes, your demonstration had measurable impact. These scores justify the instructor program investment. He made notes on his clipboard. I'm requesting immediate approval rather than waiting for standard processing timelines. The command needs to see this data. Henderson had gathered a small group of Marines around his lane, explaining the differences he had noticed between shooting his new rifle and watching Reyes shoot her worn one. His tone had shifted from defensive frustration to analytical interest, someone reassessing everything he thought he understood about equipment and performance. I spent $2,000 on this rifle thinking it would make me a better shooter, he was saying to the group. It's an excellent rifle, but Staff Sergeant Reyes proved that I wasted my money if I'm not willing to invest the time learning it properly. Her 43,000 round count is worth more than any equipment upgrade I could buy. Rivera was showing his notes to other Marines, explaining the wind reading patterns and timing techniques Reyes had demonstrated. Several were copying his diagrams, discussing practice schedules, comparing local range access and ammunition costs. The conversation had shifted from skepticism about worn equipment to practical planning for sustained improvement. A master sergeant who had been observing quietly throughout the morning approached Reyes. He was older than most of the group, his uniform bearing ribbons that spoke of multiple deployments and extensive service. Ma'am, I'm Master Sergeant Kowalski. I run marksmanship training for my battalion. What you demonstrated today challenges everything I've been teaching for the past 15 years. I've been emphasizing equipment standards, pushing Marines to upgrade to better rifles and optics. You just proved that approach might be fundamentally wrong. She measured her response carefully, recognizing the difficulty of admitting that years of instruction might need revision. Master Sergeant, equipment standards matter for institutional consistency. The Corps needs reliable, maintainable weapons that perform adequately in varied conditions. What I'm suggesting is not that we abandon equipment quality, but that we shift focus toward helping Marines truly learn whatever equipment they're issued. Deep familiarity with adequate equipment beats superficial knowledge of excellent equipment. Kowalski nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. That's a perspective shift I need to incorporate into my training programs. We spend so much time on equipment maintenance and specifications that we shortchange actual shooting practice. He gestured at her rifle. Can I examine your weapon? I want to understand what 8 years and 40,000 rounds actually produces in terms of wear and function. She handed him the rifle, and he studied it with professional expertise, checking the action, examining the barrel, testing the trigger. The bluing is worn off in several places. Stock shows significant handling marks, but the mechanical function is flawless. Action is smooth. Trigger breaks cleanly. He looked through the scope, adjusting focus and parallax. Glass is clear, tracking is solid. This rifle looks terrible, but performs beautifully. That's the lesson right there. Phillips called the group to formation for final debriefing. Morrison stood before them, his clipboard set aside, his demeanor shifting from range officer to commander. Marines, what you witnessed and experienced this morning represents a fundamental truth about military competence. Excellence is not purchased. It's earned through dedication and sustained effort. Staff Sergeant Reyes demonstrated perfect marksmanship with worn equipment because she invested 8 years of consistent practice. That level of commitment is available to every one of you. The question is whether you value improvement enough to do the work. He paused, letting the words settle. The Marine Corps will support those who demonstrate genuine commitment to excellence. The marksmanship program being developed will provide resources, coaching, and recognition for Marines who pursue sustained improvement. But the program cannot provide motivation or discipline. Those must come from you. Henderson raised his hand. Sir, how do we access the program once it's approved? Details will be published through official channels. But the short answer is this. Start practicing now. Keep detailed logs. Show consistent effort over months, not weeks. Document your progress. When the program launches, you'll already have the foundation needed to benefit from formal coaching. Rivera spoke up. Sir, Staff Sergeant Reyes mentioned she's willing to provide mentorship to Marines who demonstrate commitment. Is that offer open to this group? Morrison glanced at Reyes, who nodded confirmation. Yes. Staff Sergeant Reyes will review training logs and provide feedback to Marines who maintain regular practice schedules. But understand that her time is limited. She's offering mentorship, not hand-holding. You need to do the work first, then seek guidance on specific issues. The formation broke and Marines dispersed to secure their equipment and prepare for departure. Several approached Reyes with final questions, requests for contact information, expressions of gratitude for the demonstration. Henderson handed her a card with his email address. Ma'am, I'm committing to 5,000 rounds this year. Same rifle, consistent ammunition, detailed logging. I'll send you quarterly updates if that's acceptable. That's acceptable, Staff Sergeant. I look forward to seeing your progress. Kowalski waited until the other Marines had departed before approaching again. Ma'am, I'd like to invite you to conduct a similar demonstration for my battalion. We have about 80 Marines who would benefit enormously from seeing what you showed this group today. Would you be willing to consider that? She felt the scope of her impact expanding beyond what she had anticipated when Morrison first invited her to demonstrate. Master Sergeant, if Captain Morrison approves and the scheduling works, I'm willing. The more Marines who understand that excellence comes from dedication rather than equipment, the better. Phillips was breaking down the observation area equipment, coiling cables, and securing monitors. He called over to her. Ma'am, next quarter's training cycle starts in 12 weeks. I'm already receiving requests from Marines who want to observe another demonstration. Word is spreading fast about what happened here this week. Morrison joined them, satisfaction evident in his posture. Staff Sergeant, in 2 qualification sessions, you've changed the culture around marksmanship at this facility. Marines are discussing practice schedules instead of equipment upgrades. They're asking about technique instead of making excuses. That's the transformation we needed. 3 months passed with remarkable speed. Reyes maintained her weekend practice routine while also responding to a steady stream of emails from Marines seeking guidance on their training programs. Rivera sent detailed logs every 2 weeks, showing consistent range sessions and methodical improvement. Henderson's quarterly report documented exactly 5,000 rounds fired, all through the same rifle, all with hand-loaded ammunition he had learned to prepare himself. His scores had improved dramatically, moving from barely qualifying expert to shooting groups that approached her demonstrations. Morrison's proposal for the Marksmanship Excellence Program had been approved faster than anyone expected, driven by the statistical evidence from those 2 qualification sessions. The 75% expert rate had caught the attention of senior command, who wanted to understand how a single demonstration could produce such immediate results. Funding had been allocated for range access, ammunition subsidies, and instructor compensation. Phillips was coordinating implementation across multiple bases. The program officially launched on a clear morning in late spring. Reyes stood before 40 Marines assembled at the main range facility, no longer just demonstrating for a single qualification group, but formally instructing as part of an established program. The Marines represented different units, different experience levels, different starting points in their marksmanship journeys. What they shared was documented commitment to sustained practice and genuine desire to improve. Morrison made the introduction with formal ceremony that acknowledged the significance of the moment. Marines, you have been selected for the inaugural session of the Marksmanship Excellence Program based on your demonstrated commitment to consistent practice over the past 3 months. You maintained regular training schedules. You documented your progress. You showed the discipline and dedication that this program is designed to support. He gestured toward Reyes. Staff Sergeant Reyes will be your primary instructor for this week-long intensive training. She brings 8 years of disciplined practice and combat-proven capability to this program. Listen to her. Learn from her. Apply what she teaches. Phillips added practical details about the week structure. Each day will include live-fire practice, individual coaching sessions, and detailed analysis of your techniques. Staff Sergeant Reyes will work with each of you personally to identify specific areas for improvement. This is not a qualification course. This is an opportunity to develop mastery through intensive guided practice. Reyes stepped forward, her worn rifle visible in its case beside her instruction materials. She had prepared carefully for this moment, understanding that formal instruction required different approaches than casual demonstration. Good morning, Marines. Over the next week, we're going to focus on 3 core principles that produce marksmanship excellence. First, deep equipment knowledge developed through extensive repetition with one specific weapon. Second, environmental awareness that allows accurate prediction of bullet behavior under varied conditions. Third, disciplined practice methodology that ensures every training session produces measurable improvement. She opened her rifle case and withdrew the familiar weapon, its worn finish now something of a legend among Marines who had heard about the demonstrations. This rifle has become somewhat famous over the past few months. I've received messages from Marines across the Corps asking about its specifications, its history, its capabilities. But the rifle itself is not special. What's special is the relationship between this rifle and me, built over 45,000 rounds now and 8 years of consistent practice. A staff sergeant in the front row raised his hand. Ma'am, I've been practicing consistently since your demonstration 3 months ago. I've fired about 800 rounds through my rifle, all with the same ammunition. I'm seeing improvement, but nothing like the results you demonstrate. How much practice does it take before the breakthrough happens? Honest question deserving an honest answer. There is no single breakthrough moment. Improvement is gradual and cumulative. 800 rounds is excellent progress for 3 months. You're building the foundation of familiarity, real mastery, the kind that produces consistent expert-level scores, typically requires several thousand rounds minimum. You're on the right path. Keep going. Henderson was among the group, having earned his place through his documented 5,000-round commitment. He looked different from 3 months earlier, more confident, but also more humble, someone who had learned that real competence required continuous effort. Ma'am, I brought my training logs as you requested. They document every range session, conditions, results, and observations. I'm hoping you can identify patterns I'm missing. She nodded. We'll review them in your individual coaching session this afternoon. That's exactly the kind of self-analysis that accelerates improvement. Rivera was present as well, his notebook already open, pen ready. The young Lance Corporal had become something of an evangelist for the program, recruiting other Marines from his unit and sharing his training methodology widely. Ma'am, I've been working specifically on wind reading like you demonstrated. I think I'm starting to see the patterns you described, but I'm not confident in my predictions yet. They feel like guesses more than knowledge. That's normal at your stage of development. Pattern recognition requires extensive exposure to varied conditions. You're building a mental database of what different wind states look like and how they affect bullet flight. After a few thousand more rounds in different conditions, the patterns will become clearer and your confidence will grow. Kowalski had also joined the program, bringing with him 6 Marines from his battalion who he identified as having the dedication needed for this level of commitment. His presence added institutional weight to the training, senior leadership visibly investing in the methodology Reyes had demonstrated. The week proceeded with intensity that pushed every participant. Morning sessions focused on live-fire practice with detailed observation of each Marine's technique. Reyes moved between shooting positions, watching body mechanics, identifying subtle issues with breathing or trigger control, providing specific corrective guidance tailored to individual needs. Afternoon sessions involved unknown coaching, where she reviewed training logs, analyzed performance data, and developed customized improvement plans. By midweek, the results were becoming visible. Marines who had arrived shooting adequate scores were now approaching expert levels. Those who had started as experts were refining their techniques to produce consistently tight groups. The transformation was not dramatic like her initial demonstrations, but it was measurable and sustainable, built on understanding rather than temporary motivation. Henderson's individual session revealed interesting patterns in his training data. "You're shooting excellent scores in calm conditions," she observed, reviewing his logs. "But your performance degrades significantly when wind exceeds 5 miles per hour. That suggests you're still learning to read conditions confidently. Let's spend extra time this week specifically on wind work." They spent 2 hours at the range with Reyes teaching advanced wind reading techniques, showing him how to integrate multiple indicators into coherent predictions, explaining the difference between true wind and mirage effects. Henderson absorbed the instruction with focused intensity, taking detailed notes, asking clarifying questions, demonstrating the serious commitment that produced real improvement. Rivera's coaching session focused on consistency. "Your fundamentals are solid," she told him, studying his target groupings. "But your group sizes vary significantly between sessions. Some days you're shooting 2-inch groups at 200 yards. Other days you're at 6 inches. That kind of variation usually indicates inconsistency in position or breathing. We need to identify what's changing between your good sessions and your poor ones." They worked through his shooting routine in detail, with Reyes observing every aspect of his preparation and execution. She identified subtle differences in how he positioned his support elbow, depending on fatigue level, small variations that opened his groups when he was tired. The awareness allowed him to consciously maintain proper position regardless of physical state. Phillips conducted midweek assessments, scoring qualification-level courses to measure progress. The results showed average improvement of 23% across the group, with several Marines achieving personal record scores. Morrison documented everything meticulously, building the case study that would justify program expansion to other bases. On the final day, Reyes conducted a comprehensive demonstration showing advanced techniques she had developed over years of practice. She shot at extended distances beyond standard qualification ranges, demonstrating 400 and 500-yard engagements that required sophisticated understanding of ballistics and environmental effects. The Marines watched with attention that reflected genuine appreciation for skills they now understood required years to develop. "This is where sustained commitment leads," she explained after completing the demonstration. 400 yards in variable wind with a rifle that most people would have retired years ago. This capability did not come from special talent or expensive equipment. It came from showing up every weekend for 8 years and doing the work even when progress seemed invisible. Morrison addressed the group for final remarks. "Marines, you entered this program with dedication, and you're leaving with skills that will serve you throughout your careers. Staff Sergeant Reyes has given you more than just marksmanship techniques. She's demonstrated that excellence in any field requires sustained commitment over extended time. That lesson applies far beyond rifle ranges." Kowalski added his perspective as the senior participant. "I've been teaching marksmanship for 15 years, and I learned more this week than in the previous decade combined. Not because Staff Sergeant Reyes has secret techniques, but because she understands something fundamental about skill development. Mastery requires time, consistency, and humility to accept that real competence cannot be rushed. 6 months after that first qualification, where she had walked onto the range carrying her worn rifle to skeptical stares and whispered bets, Reyes stood in a conference room at division headquarters. The walls displayed photographs of Marines throughout the Corps' history, reminders of tradition and excellence spanning generations. Morrison sat at the conference table with 3 colonels and a brigadier general, all of them reviewing statistical reports from the Marksmanship Excellence Program that had expanded to 12 bases. The numbers told a compelling story. Marines who participated in the program showed average score improvements of 32%. More significantly, those improvements sustained over time rather than fading after initial motivation wore off. Equipment requisitions for expensive match rifles had decreased by 40% as Marines focused on learning their issued weapons thoroughly. Most remarkably, combat effectiveness reports from deployed units showed measurable improvements in marksmanship performance under actual operational conditions. Brigadier General Vasquez, a lean officer with combat ribbons spanning 3 decades, studied the reports with professional interest. Staff Sergeant Reyes, your demonstration 6 months ago challenged conventional thinking about marksmanship training. These results suggest that challenge was justified. He gestured at the statistics. We've been investing heavily in equipment upgrades while underinvesting in the training time needed to employ that equipment effectively. Your approach corrects that imbalance. Sir, Reyes responded carefully, I don't claim to have revolutionized anything. I simply demonstrated what dedicated practice produces. The Marines in the program are achieving results because they're doing the work, not because I taught them secret techniques. One of the colonels, an infantry officer named Patterson, leaned forward. Staff Sergeant, humility is admirable, but let's be clear about your contribution. You proved that an 80-year-old rifle with 45,000 rounds through it could outperform the latest equipment in the hands of less experienced shooters. That demonstration gave Marines permission to focus on skill development rather than equipment acquisition. The cultural shift that produced is significant. Morrison added context. Sir, before Staff Sergeant Reyes' initial demonstration, our expert qualification rate at the range facility averaged 28%. Since implementing her methodology across our training programs, that rate has risen to 63%. We're producing better marksmen with existing equipment and lower overall costs. General Vasquez made notes on his copy of the report. Captain Morrison, I'm authorizing program expansion to all bases within the division. I'm also requesting that Staff Sergeant Reyes be assigned as Division Marksmanship Specialist with authority to develop curriculum and train instructors. He looked at Reyes directly. That would require a significant time commitment, extensive travel, responsibility for training outcomes across thousands of Marines. Are you willing to accept that role? She felt the weight of the question, understanding that accepting would transform her career trajectory and expand her influence far beyond what she had imagined that morning 6 months ago when she arrived at the range with her worn rifle. Sir, if the Corps believes I can contribute at that level, I'm willing. But I need to be clear about something. I'm not a miracle worker. I can teach methodology and demonstrate techniques. But results require individual Marines committing to sustained practice. That commitment cannot be ordered or mandated. Patterson nodded. Understood. But you can create the culture that encourages and supports that commitment. That's what we saw happen at Captain Morrison's facility. Marines started prioritizing practice because they saw your example and understood what dedication produces. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing implementation details, resource allocation, instructor training requirements, and program assessment metrics. When it concluded, General Vasquez stood and extended his hand to Reyes. Staff Sergeant, 6 months ago you were just another Marine showing up for qualification. Today you're influencing training policy across the division. That's the kind of bottom-up innovation that keeps the Corps effective. Well done. As the senior officers departed, Morrison remained behind with Reyes. He was smiling, genuine satisfaction evident in his usually stern features. Staff Sergeant, When you arrived at my range 6 months ago with that beat-up rifle, I thought you were making a mistake. I thought you should draw better equipment from the armory. I was wrong in every possible way." She returned his smile. "Sir, you gave me the opportunity to demonstrate what sustained practice produces. Without your willingness to listen and support the program, none of this expansion would have happened." He shook his head. "I gave you a chance to shoot. You did everything else. The perfect scores that prove your point. The patient teaching that transformed skeptics into believers. The detailed coaching that produced measurable results. That was all you." They walked together to the headquarters parking area where her truck waited. The rifle case sat in the back seat, as worn and familiar as ever. Morrison gestured toward it. "That rifle has become something of a legend. Marines call it the rust bucket that outshot the Corps. Have you considered what you'll do when it finally wears out?" She had thought about that question frequently over recent months. "Sir, when the barrel is completely shot out and the action is worn beyond reliable function, I'll rebuild it. Same frame if possible. New barrel from the same gunsmith who did the original work. Then I'll start the learning process again. 45,000 rounds have taught me this rifle's personality. I'm not ready to abandon that knowledge just because components need replacement." Morrison nodded understanding. "That's the lesson right there. Equipment is temporary. Knowledge is enduring. You can rebuild a rifle. You cannot rebuild 8 years of experience." Henderson appeared from the headquarters building, moving with purpose toward them. He had been promoted to gunnery sergeant and assigned as Morrison's assistant rangemaster, his transformation from skeptic to advocate now formalized in his duties. "Ma'am, sir," he said, coming to attention, "just received notification that next month program session is oversubscribed. We have 60 Marines requesting the 40 available slots. All of them have documented 3 months of consistent practice as prerequisites." Reyes felt satisfaction at the news. "That's excellent, Gunny. Marines who have already invested 3 months of practice will benefit most from intensive coaching. They've demonstrated the commitment needed to apply advanced techniques." Henderson's expression showed the humble determination that had replaced his earlier equipment-focused confidence. "Ma'am, I need to thank you again. 6 months ago, I was convinced that my expensive rifle would make me a better shooter. You showed me I had everything backwards. Since then, I've fired 8,000 rounds through the same rifle, kept detailed logs, studied my performance data. My scores have improved so much that Captain Morrison offered me this position based on my demonstrated expertise. That's outstanding progress, Gunny. You did the work. You earned those results." He nodded, then added quietly, "I still have that rifle. The expensive one I thought would solve all my problems. But now I know it completely. I've learned its characteristics, its preferences, what it does in different conditions. It's become what your rifle has been all along. Not just equipment, but an extension of my capability." Morrison checked his watch. "Staff Sergeant, your official assignment as Division Marksmanship Specialist begins next week. Between now and then, I suggest you take some time off. You've earned it." She appreciated the suggestion, but shook her head slightly. "Sir, I have range time scheduled this weekend. Same routine I've maintained for 8 years. Consistency matters, especially now that Marines across the division will be watching my example." Phillips appeared from the range facility, walking toward them with his characteristic unhurried pace. He carried a folder thick with documentation. "Ma'am," he said, handing her the folder. "Training requests from 6 different battalions. They all want you to conduct demonstrations similar to what you did here." He smiled, the weathered creases around his eyes deepening. "You started something significant. Marines everywhere are talking about the staff sergeant who proved that dedication beats equipment." She opened the folder and scanned the requests, seeing names and units from across the division. Each request included data showing Marines who had begun consistent practice schedules in preparation for her visit. The program was creating exactly the cultural shift Morrison had described. Marines were prioritizing skill development over equipment acquisition, understanding finally that excellence came from sustained effort rather than technological advantage. If you enjoyed this story and connected with the journey from skepticism to respect earned through dedication, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Or tell us if you have witnessed similar situations where someone proved doubters wrong through sheer commitment and skill. Your stories and thoughts mean everything to this community. Davis appeared at the edge of the parking area, the corporal who had bet against her that first morning. He had requested and received transfer to Morrison's range facility, wanted to be part of the marksmanship program he had initially dismissed. He approached with the formal bearing of someone seeking to make amends for past judgment. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I owe you an acknowledgement. 6 months ago, I bet $20 that you would wash out. I was completely wrong, not just about your capabilities, but about what determines marksmanship excellence. Since then, I've been following your methodology. 3,000 rounds through the same rifle. Detailed logging. Consistent practice. My scores have improved more in 6 months than in my previous 6 years of service." She nodded acceptance of his words. "Corporal Davis, you had the courage to admit you were wrong and the discipline to change your approach. That takes character. Keep up the consistent practice, and you'll achieve results that surprise you." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the headquarters complex as they concluded their conversations. Reyes loaded her equipment into her truck, the familiar routine calming in its predictability. The worn rifle case, the shooting bag with her spotting scope and data books, the ammunition boxes filled with hand-loaded rounds precisely tailored to her rifle's preferences. Morrison offered final words as she prepared to depart. "Staff Sergeant, you walked onto my range 6 months ago as an unknown Marine with questionable equipment. You're leaving as a division asset who changed how we think about marksmanship training. That's a remarkable transformation." She considered his words carefully before responding. "Sir, I'm the same Marine I was 6 months ago. Same rifle, same methodology, same commitment to consistent practice. What changed was not me, but the willingness of others to look past surface appearance and recognize that true capability comes from dedication rather than equipment quality. That lesson applies far beyond rifle ranges." As she drove away from headquarters, she thought about the journey from that first morning when Marines had mocked her worn rifle to this afternoon, when generals were approving program expansion based on her methodology. The rifle beside her looked no better than it had 6 months earlier. The finish was still worn. The stock still bore scratches and dings. But now those marks represented proven capability rather than assumed inadequacy. She had learned something unexpected through this experience. Her 8 years of solitary weekend practice had built more than just marksmanship skill. They had built a foundation of discipline, consistency, and deep competence that could influence others far beyond what she had imagined. Marines across the division were now following her example, discovering that excellence was accessible to anyone willing to invest sustained effort. The transformation from skepticism to respect had required nothing more than demonstrating the results that dedication produced. No arguments, no justifications, just perfect scores that spoke louder than any explanation could. And now that demonstration was rippling outward, changing culture and improving capability throughout the Corps. As she headed toward her home range for weekend practice, she felt profound satisfaction knowing that her worn rifle and her years of consistent effort had contributed something meaningful to the Marines who would carry forward the lessons she had taught. Excellence through dedication. Mastery through consistency. Results through sustained commitment. Those principles would endure long after her rifle finally wore out and her own career moved on to other challenges. The skeptics had been silenced not by her words, but by her unwavering demonstration of what 8 years of disciplined practice could achieve. And in that silence, a new understanding had emerged that would make Marines better marksmen and better warriors for generations to come.